You probably realize that I've been a little busy this last week, so today's sermon will be about 4 minutes. I said yesterday at the wedding that I have 2 favorite daughters, but I did tell Maddie Ann that if she would consider eloping, I might move her up on the list. Oh, it's been a wonderful week, and it's been a wonderful yesterday, and we certainly are blessed very much. And we all are blessed, of course, to be together today on this Lord's Day to worship our great God and for His great mercy upon all of us. Obviously, this year has been a discussion about changes, and this last week, this has been a lot of news that we've had to absorb and think about as we look toward the future. And I want you to open your Bibles to Genesis chapter 12, because I've thought about, as we are looking toward these assemblies at Mastin Lake before we make this transition to Meridianville, what would be the things to say and what would be the things to talk about. And I think as we study some things that are said to Abraham and a call to him that I know we're all very, very familiar with, that we can learn some great lessons as we make application and preparation for what lies ahead. In Genesis chapter 11, in the latter part of that, we're given some information about Abraham's family and the bloodline and the genealogy that's coming down to Abraham, his brothers, and it tells about Abraham's wife, it tells about his nephew, and it tells how the family moved to a certain region and how that they were all in this place, and yet God, overseeing this process and knowing all of this and having a great divine plan even before time began, was going to call Abraham to the purpose that God had had in mind for a long, long time. And so we read in the beginning of Genesis chapter 12, now the Lord had said to Abram, as he is called at this point, get out of your country, from your family, and from your father's house to a land that I will show you. I will make you a great nation. I will bless you and make your name great, and you will be a blessing. And I will bless those who bless you, and I will curse those who curse you, and in you all the families of the earth shall be blessed. We read in the first part of the next verse, Genesis 12, verse 4, so Abram departed as the Lord had spoken to him. Now we know that this was a divine call and a divine direction, yet Abraham demonstrates great faith with responding obediently to the call of the Lord. In a few moments before this lesson is over, we're going to refer to the New Testament commentary on this in Hebrews chapter 11, because we're going to think obviously about faith today, but there are 3 things that I really want us to think about when we consider Abraham, when we consider Mastin Lake Road, and when we think about the things that lie ahead. I want us to think about, number 1, a future. Number 2, going forward. And number 3, going forward in the future with faith. So you can just use those 3 words of future and forward and faith, and you have the idea of the general direction of this particular lesson. But as we think about future, God was thinking about Abraham's future, and the future not only of Abraham, but the future of generations to come, and the future of many, many other people when He called him in Genesis chapter 12. And we have to realize that the future is a remarkable, remarkable idea to conceive, because none of us have a crystal ball. None of us have the ability to know what lies ahead, at least in the sense that sometimes we might like to know every specific detail about every specific thing. We can know generally some things that lie ahead, but sometimes we want the tedious details on most of everything that lies ahead. But when Abraham was called to his future, when Abraham was called and Abraham was said, God said to him in Genesis 12, get out of your country, away from your family, and from your father's house to a land that I will show you, there's some interesting details that are left out that you and I might like to have. First of all, Abraham didn't know exactly where. He really doesn't know much about the when or the how or the what. Why am I, and the why, why am I doing this? And in many senses, as we think about the future, as we think about what lies ahead for Mastin Lake Road, in many senses, we know more than Abraham did about some things. That is not to take it out of God's hands. That is not to say that God does not have other plans even about other things, and that's not to say that we are superseding the knowledge of God. But just comparing what we are charting out for ourselves and what God charted out for Abraham, right now we have even more reason to have great faith than Abraham did. Because we know some answers to some questions that Abraham, I'm sure, wondered what the answer was. Why God? And where God? And what reason? And when? And how long? And all of these things, no doubt, came to Abraham's mind, and I think we'll see before we end this lesson and looking at Hebrews 11 exactly some of the encouragement we can receive even when we don't know everything. Now there's something interesting as we're also thinking about this word future. How old was Abraham at this time? You do the math and you go back in chapter 11 and you do the other math. He was 75 years old. So when God calls, when God is ready to take us to another direction or another place, age is not really necessarily a factor. My grandmother, Granny Mabel, when she was 85 years old, she had lived in the same house for over 40 years. And when she was 85 years old, she just announced to us all one day, selling the house, moving to an apartment. And so we showed up and helped her move. And then, after she lived in that apartment for 7 years, she announced to us one day at age 92, getting out of the apartment, moving to an assisted living place. So we showed up and we helped her move again. And age was not a factor, and she determined what she wanted to do and was blessed very much with the mental faculties to do that and family to lift the furniture that she couldn't. And it was a blessing, really, to know that she could look at her future and age was not really a factor. Now, several years ago, I heard a story on Paul Harvey. And some of you don't know who I'm talking about when I talk about Paul Harvey, but most of you do. But so it has to be true, if it was on Paul Harvey. But he talked about a lady, and I believe this was in France. It was in France or Italy. It was not a story that happened in America. But either in France or Italy, there was a woman who at age 90, she put up a second house that she owned for rent. And she put it up for rent under the terms that when she passed away, the renter would inherit the house. So one man signed up for that deal because he thought, hey, I'm not going to have to pay rent very long before this place will be mine. She's 90, so I'm looking at just a few years maybe at the most that I'll be out in the clear and I'll own this place. Well, 5 years passed, he's still paying rent. 10 years passed. The lady turned 100. He's still paying rent. When all was said and done, the lady outlived the man. And after he died and they cleared out his stuff, she put her house back up for rent. So age is not necessarily a factor in God's planning or God's timing. And as we think about the future, we don't know what it holds. I understand that. Abraham did not know what the future would hold for him. He did not know that at age 75 he would actually live an entirely another century. But While we don't know what the future holds, as the song says, we know who holds the future. And we can look toward the future just like Abraham with confidence. We may not know every answer. We may not know every detail. We may wish to have some questions answered faster than they will be answered. But we can look toward the future because we know that it is God who leads us into it. We know that it is God who directs it. And we have great reason for great confidence. And we now morph into a second point that builds on this first one about the future, and that's forward. You see, Abraham ultimately was going to move forward. Abraham would greatly be blessed. You notice that God says to him that I will make you a great nation. I will bless you and make your name great, and you will be a blessing. You see, when God calls us with great plans, ultimately it is to bless other people. God can make of one man who was 75 years old and his wife who was barren a great nation. And it would be a quarter of a century after this was said that he would even have one child. That was the child of promise. Now, he had a child before that trying to preempt God's plan, but the child of promise, the child that God was talking about, that great nation would come from, was 25 years yet in the future. Sometimes it's hard for us to think 25 years into the future. Sometimes it's hard for us to think 25 minutes into the future. But this was moving forward. And God said, I'm going to take you forward. You're going to be a great person. You're going to be a great nation. Interestingly enough, even though Abraham would live 100 more years after this, when he died, he had had that one son of promise, and that one son of promise had 2 children. Not much of a great nation at that point at his death, but Abraham still knew he could move forward. Abraham still knew there was something in the future that would take this family forward because it was God and God's plan. As we think about Mastin Lake Road, as we think about our future, we're thinking about moving forward. Yes, that entails closing our location here, but it does not entail closing our relationship with God. Abraham had to move from where he was to a different place. But God didn't move away from him, and he didn't move away from God. God was with him, and he was with God every step of the way. Forward. He moved forward. We are going to essentially marry these 2 congregations, and the 2 shall become one. And you probably noticed on the back of the announcement sheet, if you have not already, but there is a note there, even from the Meridianville congregation, of their anticipation of this consolidation of these congregations. We were blessed last week to have all of the Meridianville eldership here to make the presentation about the congregation, to say the things that they said about moving forward. They are anticipating this. They are looking forward to this in so many ways. They already are working in so many ways to include the Mastin Lake people in some of the things they're doing. You know, they have a full-time youth director, and they not only take care of their youth who are still in junior high and high school, they work with their young adults who are in college. And they have several students at Fried Hardeman, just like we have 5 boys at Fried Hardeman. This last week, the youth director and Rick Schatz, who's one of the elders over the youth program, they were at Fried Hardeman. They took not only all the Meridianville kids out, they took our kids out too. Because our kids are their kids. It is not a we and a they anymore, it is us. They have contacted our youth already who are here. They have contacted, I know those who not necessarily connected with Fried Hardeman. They've contacted our high school and made them know about things that are happening. And we are excited about this, and they are excited about this, and they're already looking forward to the day that is here as you and I, to the day that is going to be here. And you and I, hopefully, are blessed to look forward as well, because it's future, but it's future that is forward. We are not in shutdown mode. We are in grow mode. We are in growth and future and forward mode. As Sam mentioned a few moments ago, there is a sheet on the back of the table, and on the tables in the back of the auditorium, that is a two-sided sheet. That's an information sheet for you to fill out like you did perhaps many years ago here, but it's also a sheet that has spaces on it for what are you willing to do? What are you willing to be a part of in the work of the congregation at Meridianville? Because we don't want to just go and quit what we've been doing. We're continuing. The work does not stop. Our Christianity does not stop. Our life does not stop. And we're just going to move it to a different location. And we're going to intermesh and grow many new brothers and sisters in Christ, relationships and friendships, because we're moving forward. Notice God says, I'll make you a great nation, and I'll bless you, and you will be a blessing. We want to be a blessing. We're able to continue being a blessing to all our missionaries and continue supporting all of our mission works and mission programs. And we can only see a greater enhancement of God's work by making this change and this transition. And you have been very, very supportive the whole way. You have been very, very encouraging the whole way. I know that in some ways it is a sad thing to think about. I know in some ways it is something that is bittersweet in many ways. But I know that we can do what we are going to do, and we can make the move that we are going to make with no regrets about the past. The Mastin Lake congregation has stood firm in the faith for 61 years. And it is not a perfect congregation, just as there are no perfect congregations. There are no perfect people here, but there is nothing to be ashamed of. There is a great heritage here. There are great memories here. There has been a wonderful past and even present here. But we know we cannot live in the past. It's not healthy. And we want to take the present and we want to move it forward into the future. And we optimistically believe, with the blessing of God, this is only going to grow to something much greater than we already are. And we know that the blessings of God are there and that we can be a blessing to others. We can't live in the past. We can't stay there. We can enjoy the memories and we can enjoy what has been done. And no one can ever take that away from anyone. But there are more memories to be made. There is a future. There are more works to be done. There are more blessings to give. There are more ways that we can enhance and glorify God in every step we take, future and forward. But number 3, we do it by faith. This is not a business transaction. We're not merging, Walmart and Sears or anything. Well, Sears doesn't even exist anymore, but some other business. This is not a business transaction. This is a spiritual transaction. We are moving forward with faith. We are looking at our future with faith. 2 Corinthians chapter 5, verse 7 says, "For we walk," how? Not by sight, but how? By faith. We walk by faith. And the fact that it says we walk, that implies what? We're going somewhere. We're not standing still. We're not stagnating. We're going forward. We are walking forward by faith. And when we look at Hebrews chapter 11 that I referred to earlier, we have some inspired commentary on what we have read and discussed from Genesis chapter 12. And in Hebrews chapter 11, we begin reading at verse 8. Hebrews 11, verse 8, about Abraham and some of the implication of what all of this means and application for you and me today. In Hebrews 11, verse 8, by faith, Abraham obeyed when he was called to go out to the place where he would receive as an inheritance, and he went out, how? Not knowing where he was going. Like I said, we know more than Abraham in some senses, in some ways, but still there is that sense that we're walking by faith. And we, like Abraham, are going out. Verse 9, by faith he dwelt in the land of promise as in a foreign country, dwelling in tents with Isaac and Jacob, the heirs of him with the same promise. For he waited for the city which has foundations, whose builder and maker is God. You see, the city that we wait for is not Huntsville or Meridianville or Hazel Green or Madison or Birmingham or Washington or Beijing. The city we wait for is heaven. This is just a repository. This is just a channel that we are moving through as we make our way to a greater place. You see, Abraham was a sojourner, a temporary resident. That's what it means. And he lived in temporary housing, in a tent. He lived here and there because that wasn't his permanent home, and he knew it. This world is not my home. I am just a passing through. And as we pass through, we have been blessed to pass through with Mastin Lake. We are blessed to pass through forward and in the future with Meridianville. We are blessed to pass through such great places with so many great and wonderful brethren. And we do that by faith. Just like Abraham knew he was looking for a greater city, a more permanent place. You continue on in the text, in verse 11 talks about Sarah even. By faith, Sarah herself also received strength to conceive seed, and she bore a child when she was past the age, because she judged him faithful who had promised. Therefore, from one man, and him as good as dead, was born many as the stars of the sky, and multitude innumerable as the sand which is by the seashore. These all died in faith. That's what the first part of verse 13 says. These all died in faith. That ought to be etched on the tombstone of every child of God, that we have died in faith. Like Abraham, not knowing necessarily where we're going, not knowing necessarily what the future would hold, but we died in faith because we followed God. These all died in faith, what? Not having received the promises, but having seen them afar off, were assured of them, embraced them, and confessing that they were strangers and pilgrims on the earth, seeing something afar off, but knowing that it's there. When I was a child, between my fourth grade year in elementary school and fifth grade year, I went with a trip out west with my grandparents. And we have family all the way out in Phoenix, Arizona, and we made a trek over there to Phoenix to see them. And then we came back up north and then back to the east and then back down to Alabama. And it was about a 2-week trip. And I remember as a child, 10 or so years old, that we're driving along, and way up in the distance, I could see what I would later learn were the Colorado Rockies. There was this big, beautiful mountain. You could see the white caps on the top. And I thought, wow, that's really neat. Look at those mountains. I've never seen any mountains like that, that huge, that large. And I'm thinking, we'll be there in 10 minutes. 70 miles later, we're still not there. I saw them afar off. We finally got there, but it was a lot longer than I thought it should have taken. You know, we see things afar off, but you know what? We know they are there. I saw those Rockies from miles and miles and miles away. That did not change the fact that they were there. They're further than I thought they were, but they were there. Abraham and others saw the promises a long way off, but they knew they were there. And consequently, as we read, they were assured of them. They embraced them. In verse 14, and those who say such things declare plainly, they seek a homeland. And truly, if they had called to mind that country from which they had come out, they would have had opportunity to return. You see, we can't live in the past. Abraham might have thought, you know, this going around the wilderness and not knowing where I'm going, you know, this is not for me. I'm going back home. I'm going back to where I'm comfortable. I'm going back to where I belong. I'm going back to where I came from. I'm going back to where everything is familiar. I'm going back to the past. And I'm going to go live in the past. Abraham did not have that kind of faith. Faith does not live in the past. Faith looks forward. Faith looks to the future. Faith makes the best of the present as it plans for the future. We cannot look back with regret. We cannot look back to the sense that it disables us from working for the future. Because if you live in the past, you will do nothing in the future. And as you think about what the text continues on to say, verse 16, for now they desire a better. You got our attention now, don't you? Anytime somebody says something to you that's better, I got something better, your ears perk up. Now they desire a better. That is a heavenly country. Therefore, God is not ashamed to be called their God, for He has prepared a city for them. God has prepared us a city. We are just temporary residents on this earth. We are just sojourners and pilgrims. This is not permanent. This is not what it's all about. This is not the full intent of the blessings of God. There is something yet greater. There is something, as the text says, yet better. Because God has prepared for us a heavenly country. You may notice, depending on what translation you have, that the word country is italicized. That means it's a supplied word. You literally could translate that legitimately and with all of the background of what is in the original text. God has prepared for them a heavenly, not an earthly. God has prepared for us a heavenly. It's not about the physical and the material. It's about the spiritual. It's about being with God in the country where God is, that God has prepared for us. Isn't that what Jesus said? In John 14, I go to prepare a place for you. And if I go, I will come again and receive you to myself, that where I am, there you may be also. We are awaiting a transition. I'm not talking about from Mastin Lake to Meridianville. We are awaiting a transition from this life to the next. We are awaiting a transition from the here and now to the heavenly with God. We are awaiting a future that's forward, that we follow by faith. We are awaiting a transition from this life, which is temporary, to the next life, which is eternal. God bless us all, wherever we may be, to follow that path. And to know that Jesus is preparing the place for us, that He's coming again to receive us unto Him, that where He is, that's where we're going to be. We're going to be where Jesus is. Are you ready? Are you ready to be where Jesus is? Are you ready for Jesus to come back? Are you ready for Jesus to receive you? Are you in the receiving mode? Are you in the receiving mindset? Do you need to change something? Do you need to prepare yourself for the return of Jesus? Do you need to obey the gospel? Do you need to be immersed in the waters of baptism to have the blood of Jesus cleanse your soul of its sins? Are you ready to receive Jesus spiritually into your heart and mind and life and walk in faith, not by sight, but by faith? Are you ready? Is there something you need to do as a Christian that you need to make right to be in the receiving mindset and the receiving mode of life for Jesus to return? If you're not ready for Jesus, get ready. Get ready this morning. Would you come as we stand and we sing?
Shines for you and me. Let us listen to the call of love. Zion's call is ringing, coming from the throne above.